Hello, reader. Thank you for joining us. This is the Christian Readers Community Podcast. On this podcast, we will be discussing with fellow readers and authors. You will never lack for good conversations and recommendations of Christian books. If you're a lover of literary works, fiction and non-fiction, then you have made the right stop here. Thank you for joining us again, and I hope you listen to every podcast that we get to put out for you. Thank you.
Jeff Walton is a U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and retired NCIS special agent who spent nearly 30 years in NCIS and interagency assignments, conducting and managing major felony, counterintelligence, and counterterrorism investigation and operations in the United States, the Far East, and Europe. He finally accepted God's call to be a follower of Jesus Christ relatively late in life. Following retirement, he embarked on a 5-year study of all things related to the scriptures. He found many parallels between events in the Bible and his former profession. He poured his newfound passion for spotlighting the truth about the Bible, the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to the Christian Readers Community. I'm Faith and I'm back with another author. Today, I'll be interviewing him about this powerful book I found this book on Goodreads, and by the time I finished reading halfway through, I decided that, okay, I'm going to get this author over here to come talk to us about his books. About this particular book titled Final Departure, and his name is Jeff Walton. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Faith. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. It's also wonderful to have you here. Your book actually, wow, I don't know what to say, but it was just wow. I think maybe before we finish the show, I will be able to find a suitable word for to describe your book. That's just how wonderful it was. Without wasting much time, let me first start by asking you, is Final Departure your first book?
Yes, it is. My first book.
Okay.
Yep.
So tell us, what's the story about?
Well, the story is about a retired NCIS special agent who is in the Douglas International Airport. He's headed home, and he's just about ready to retire. And the airport is caught in a massive ice storm. And so he's trapped. All of the passengers are trapped. The roads are closed in and out of the airport. So he has to spend the night there. And while he's sitting in the airport, he happens to have a Jewish atheist professor, sociology professor, who happens to sit next to him. And since they're both trapped, they start to have a discussion. They get to know each other. And once they feel comfortable talking, then they begin to sort of reveal who they are. Eventually, the topics of the conversation go toward Dan Lucas, who is a sort of a closet Christian. His obsession is researching the Bible and finding facts that prove that it's true. Now, when he reveals that to the professor is very arrogant, he's very condescending, and they get into a debate, which actually lasts most of the night. And while they're in the airport, there's a lot of activity outside. There's a massive truck crash that has an impact on the airport. It affects the power supply. There's some police activity. There's a kidnapping. And all of that is related to what's going on inside the terminal, in particular to Dan and Ben. As they start talking, Dan reveals that he saw his worst enemy in the airport. Just coincidentally, he saw his worst enemy, who's also in the airport, and Dan never forgave him. And so he confesses that to Dan, or to Ben rather, and then Ben reveals that he's on his way to see his daughter. He hasn't seen his daughter in 10 years because they're estranged. He was very cruel to her, and she broke off contact. So throughout the night, they talk about the Bible. And every time Ben tries to disparage Christianity and the accuracy of the Bible, Dan has an answer. And so they go back and forth throughout the night. It's really a major debate, but it's broken up by confessions between the two men. And it really gets into their personal lives, their failings. Both are divorced. Ben is also very egotistical. He's very self-centered. Excuse me. So they get into all that. And as the night goes forward, Dan reveals that he is he's an investigator, and that he has been investigating near-death experiences. And he finds those experiences to be actual proof, eyewitness proof, that there's an afterlife and that there's a heaven and a hell. And so they get into that discussion. They talk about archaeology, they talk about biology, they talk about evolution, and Dan presents a lot of facts so that the reader can go back and the reader can verify whether those facts are true. Now, toward the end of the night, Ben suffers a catastrophic event, and I don't want to explain what that is because I want the readers to read the book, so I don't want to be a spoiler here. But something happens at the end of the book, and then the story ends on Christmas Day, and Dan experiences something that is almost beyond belief. And it's related to the events in the airport. So I'll leave it at that because I don't want to be a spoiler. But that's basically what it's about. So you go ahead and fire your questions.
I actually when I also saw what Dan experienced, I said that it is beyond belief. I was also wowed. I was like, oh my goodness. And then this left me yearning for the next book in the series. And I know it's not out yet, right?
No, I actually have I didn't plan to write a second book. I put all my energy and all my whatever I could produce. I put it into Final Departure. But I got so many comments from people and requests. They said, "Look, you can't leave us like this. You got to continue the story here." So I went ahead.
I also thought it ended on a cliffhanger as well. Yeah. I thought it ended on a cliffhanger, and I was expecting a second book.
Well, I did produce a second book. It's called Divine Return. Death is Never the End, and it actually picks up where Final Departure leaves off. But it's also so it's what I would call a standalone sequel. In other words, you could pick the book up, and there's enough backstory in the book so you know what happened in the past. However, I strongly recommend that readers first read Final Departure so they can have an appreciation for the characters. And then when they pick up Divine Return, then it'll feel like, okay, this is a continuation. So it's out. I encourage people to read it. I hope they get something out of it.
Yeah. I did. I'm sure I did. And I know I did. Because I was reading the argument between Dan and Ben. It was strong on both sides. They presented points. At some point, I was like, okay, is this a philosopher? I was wondering if you were a philosopher. It was when I got to the end and I read your biography, and I was like, okay. So, let's go to my next question for you before I ask the next one and the next. Sure. Okay, so tell me what inspired this story, because I'm going to the next question I'll be asking you is related to this. So let me start with this one first. What inspired this story?
Okay. Well, what inspired me to write Final Departure? The catalyst was a book that I read written by Bill Weiss. The title was 23 Minutes in Hell. I read it on February 9th, 2010. I always remember that day. And really prior to that time, I was what you would describe as an intellectual Christian and kind of a seeker. And I was slowly recovering from being totally backslidden. I mean, I had been away from the church for decades, and I was slowly reconnecting with the Bible and Jesus Christ when I read his book. Now, when I bought it, I initially thought it was just going to be ridiculous. I didn't believe him. I didn't think that anybody could go to hell. So I basically bought it for entertainment. I figured I'd have a good laugh. But once I started reading it, I stopped laughing. And I realized this guy is probably telling the truth. Because I've interviewed a lot of witnesses in my day, and I know when they're lying and I know when they're telling the truth. And this guy came across as definitely telling the truth. So when I was finished, it really changed my whole view of life. It was a sort of a life-changing moment. Now, one of the things that I didn't know anything about was out-of-body experiences. And for those that aren't familiar with Weiss's book, he describes how he was pulled out of his body and sent to hell just so he could come back and explain what it was like. And a lot of people scoff at that, but I started to do research and found out that there is a whole sort of a scientific field of near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. They're peer-reviewed, and there's a lot of documentation that proves that they're really happening. So once I read his book, I really started to worry about, okay, where am I going to go when I die? I certainly don't want to go to hell. And one of the things that Bill puts in his book is a lot of scripture, because his bottom line message is, look, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe what I did was true or what I report is true, but read what the Bible has to say. And his book is full of scripture, full of passages. So that sent me to the Bible. So that started me on about a 5-year full-time study, if you will, sort of like a master's program, where I dug into everything. I dug into near-death experiences. I dug into history, archaeology, biology, geography, everything you could think of that would be related to the Bible and whether or not it's true. And about after 5 years of this digging, I was convinced that yes, the Bible was true, and Jesus Christ was a Son of God, as he said he was. He was resurrected as recorded in the ancient scriptures, and I wanted to share the facts that I had developed and to put it in writing so that if anybody didn't believe me, they could check for themselves. So at the time, I knew I didn't have any theological credentials. So I realized that the only vehicle that I could use to get my message across would be a novel that would contain facts. And some of your listeners are probably familiar with some of the famous novels that were written in the past. C.S. Lewis wrote Screwtape Letters. He wrote the Book of Narnia.
Yeah.
You had The Shack that was written by William Young. Now, Young got his theology wrong, but at least his novel attracted a lot of people who may have no faith in God whatsoever. So I decided I needed to write a novel, but I also decided that I wanted to write something that would appeal to people who weren't Christians, who didn't believe in God. So I tried to make it much broader, and I tried to develop a story that would pull people in and impact them or touch them at a much deeper level. In other words, not just a story, but I wanted to hit their soul with a storyline that they could identify with. You know, I get into areas like divorce and selfishness, the past sins that haunt all of us, infidelity, divorce, families that are fragmented because of a lack of love and forgiveness. And all of us, we're all guilty at one time or another of living and having idols that aren't God. And so I wanted to touch on all of that from a realistic perspective. And I also wanted to put in there a little bit about counterintelligence, my old profession, because there's so much news about national security and counterintelligence, and a lot of it is incorrect. They use the wrong terms, and they just simply don't report it correctly. So I wanted to put a little bit of that into the story to make it interesting and also to educate. So when I was all done and I looked at it and it was finished, it came across to me as a book both for believers who have faith, but they can't explain why, or for people who don't believe, but want answers about life and death, but they're turned off by organized religion. You know, there's the old saying that some Bible teachers will tell you that, well, the Bible is true because it says it's true. Well, that's circular reasoning. You know, that doesn't really resonate. So I wanted to put facts out. I wanted to put them out in a neutral, objective way, and then the reader can decide for themselves what they believe. So that's what propelled me to write, and that's what's keeping me writing today.
Wow. You know, because after I finished reading your book, while I was still reading it, I half expected, like I said earlier, I expected to see that you were a philosopher or a theologist. But then, reading your biography, I discovered, wow, that it was something else. And I think you've answered my next question, because I wanted to ask, how you drew, where you got your depth of knowledge, like where you got, how you were able to, gather all those points and, write about it, seeing that you were into, you were a military personnel, right? From what I saw in your biography.
Yeah, I was a civilian NCIS special agent for 30 years. NCIS is a civilian agency in the Department of the Navy. And as a criminal investigator and as a counterintelligence operations specialist, you have to dig for facts. You have to be objective. You have to be neutral. You have to be able to communicate what you find in a clear way, and you have to go for the truth. You can't be influenced by your own personal beliefs. So I use the same techniques that I would use at work to dig for Bible information, for apologetics information. And I came into this neutral because, for example, evolution. I could care less whether evolution was true. But when I started to see that there was deception in the way that evolution, let's say, was being presented, that got my antenna up, because my old job was to detect deception. And so I started to dig, and I found a lot of reputable, credentialed academics in their various fields that presented information that you could verify. And I realized, the Bible is actually literally true in every respect, really. And so I drew on my past experience to investigate, to dig, to analyze, and then to report. So it really helped me, because really as an agent, you're really dealing with the 10 commandments. What are the 10 commandments? What are some of the commandments? Thou shalt not murder. Well, I used to deal with murder cases. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. That's fraud. That's speaking falsely or acting with false intent. So I had that background.
Oh, okay. So, you actually presented both facts and you did both fact and fiction in your book. Can I ask you a question about a particular point you raised?
Yeah.
An eye-opening point about secular music. Talk to us about that, please.
Well, that's an interesting topic, because years ago, actually, as a youngster, I was in a rock band. I grew up as a musician, but as I started to listen to rock, popular music, I kept hearing references to Satan. Now, some people would say, "Oh, yeah, that's just a fad. That's just a marketing technique." But after you hear it over and over again, and you start to dig into music, you realize that there's a much darker, more sinister motivation behind all this. And I think a lot of rock, people need to be very careful of what they listen to, because these themes of evil and hate and darkness, they're not from God. They're from the father of lies. They're from Satan. And I really believe that some rock music, not all rock music, is inspired by the devil. And I would be very cautious about what I listen to. So I think it's a real problem. And I think if you look at the music awards now, if you look at some of the music videos, they're just simply satanic rituals. There's no other way to describe them. It's witchcraft, and it's very harmful to our youth. I wouldn't let.
I agree with you. I agree. Simple way of putting it. Yeah. Right.
So that's my view on that.
Before, I would like you to please read an excerpt from your book. But before then, how can someone reach out to you if they want to maybe discuss one of the points in your book?
Oh, I'd welcome that.
Or have a question about heaven, Christianity.
The best way to reach me is at jeffwaltonbooks@gmail.com. And I promise you I will answer you. It may take a while because if I travel or if I'm busy with something else, but I promise you I will get back to you. And I enjoy hearing from listeners and readers, and I will do my best to answer whatever question you have or just correspond with you. So again, that's Jeff Walton Books, all together, @gmail.com. I also have a website, jeffwaltonbooks.com, and it also, you can reach it under my brand, which is evidenceforeternity.com. So I have a website, I have free blog posts. I don't charge anything. I just want to get the message out.
Yeah. And anyone who would like to, you can just check out our description section for this episode. You will see all the links attached to his biography. Then you can click on it and it will take you straight to his email address or his website. So Jeff, will you still write, or are you done?
Oh, no. I look at writing as a service to God. It's not something I do for any kind of fame or fortune. I feel like God put me in the position I'm in now, and he wants me to use the background that I have to write truthfully about him and his kingdom and about the truth of Jesus Christ, our King. Some people won't like to hear that, but I can tell you it is true. And you're going to either find out now or you're going to find out later when it's too late. And I strongly recommend that people put away their biases. Don't listen to the crowd and start reading and researching on their own, because eternity is forever and no one wants to go to hell. No one. I wouldn't want my worst enemy to go to hell. So that's a long answer in saying, yes, I will continue writing. I'm writing a third and final book in the Dan Lucas series. And I'm also writing a nonfiction book on the people who have come back from near-death experiences and who have been told by God to tell the world about what they saw. So I want to highlight those people, and I want to get the information about heaven and hell to people.
Oh, this is a good news. Yeah. It's a good news hearing that you'll be writing again, because I'd really like you to keep writing. And that first book, Final Departure, it was very wonderful. I highly recommend it. It's an eye opener, and very soon I'll be getting to the next book in the series. So when are we to expect the last one, the final installment?
Well, that's a good question. I'm writing it now. Like all of your listeners, I have a life, and I'm at the age now where I have family members who have some medical medical challenges, let's put it that way. And I'm the one in the family that has to step up and help them. So I'm helping some family members who are in need. So unfortunately, that's draining my time from my writing. But my goal is to get it out within the next 12 to 18 months.
All right. So without wasting much time, we'll just go straight to reading an excerpt from your book.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, feel free to choose any chapter. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna take a short excerpt out of chapter 12, and the title is Rescue Party. And this scene takes place in the airport. It's early morning. The airport's closed. It's dark. There's no heat. There's no electricity. Ben and Dan have been talking for hours off and on. And this picks up on page 179. So here we go. And they're sitting in a departure area by themselves. They isolated themselves. Here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. Dan nodded. That's why I used to get upset with the church's avoidance of addressing near-death experiences. I remember watching a Christian cable channel video that talked about salvation. It was well done overall, and it basically talked about the different views regarding what happens to us when we die. But then at the end, it asked the viewer, why take a chance? You'll never know what will happen to you until you die, and then it's too late. Only Jesus came back from the grave, and you need to accept him, or something like that. And Dan smiled at the memory. I was yelling at the TV. What do you mean we'll never know what happens to us until we die? We have thousands of eyewitnesses who can tell us a lot about what happens, and more every day. God basically is providing us with signs and wonders through resuscitated NDE eyewitnesses, and the church is treating them like they don't exist. What do you mean you used to be upset with the church? When I started to think about the complexity of the subject, I realized why the church can't do a wholesale endorsement of the validity of NDEs. And why is that? Ben asked while crossing his arms above his belly. They don't have the capability to vet the various self-identified NDE and OBE witnesses, and they run the risk of endorsing a fabricator or someone who's undergone a deceptive experience. The whole subject area is a minefield for the church. No church has ever presented an NDE witness? Some have, but on a limited basis. They're usually people that the church knows and have had some form of vetting. A few well-known Christian NDE and OBE witnesses do go out on the lecture circuit and speak at churches about their visits to heaven and hell and their encounters with Jesus. But the number of churches affected is relatively small. I still think it's an important field of study that the church should try to understand better and use on a careful basis. After all, following his death and resurrection, Christ made a point of visiting people who knew him so he could prove in the flesh that he had been raised from the dead. The Christian church should be attempting to meet the same burden of proof today with carefully selected NDE witnesses. Didn't Christ have a near-death experience? No. He was put to death and wasn't revived by a doctor. God resurrected him, at least according to legend. It's not a legend. If it were, the story of Christ would have been embellished over time and made a lot more glamorous and uplifting than it was. Who would think up the horrific events that led to Christ's crucifixion and pass them off as the final glorious days of the Son of God on earth? I mean, really, a Jewish carpenter turned self-taught rabbi who led a bunch of ragtag followers, one of whom betrayed him for money, and one who denied knowing him at his greatest hour of need? The Son of God who was horribly beaten and then nailed to a cross, and yet he didn't lift a finger to fight back while Roman soldiers spat in his face and mashed a crown of thorns into his scalp? What kind of God is that? Who'd be inspired by such a story? But his disciples were, because it happened. Once they saw Jesus alive again, their worlds changed forever. Some died terrible deaths at the hands of executioners when upholding their faith. yet they never renounce their belief in Jesus. Why let yourself be tortured to death for a phony story? Okay, I'll concede that Christ could have lived and died as advertised, but it still doesn't answer the fundamental question of how a good God could send his people to hell. I know you say God doesn't know people who reject him, but God could change them in an instant and save them. Dan asked, Ben, can I force you to like something? Not really. Then surely I can't make you love something, can I? No, I have to concede you can't. Your answer is at the heart of why we decide where we go when our body dies. God truly gave us free will with no strings attached. For God to give you the priceless gift of being able to love others and to receive love in return, he also had to give you the power to reject love and to deny it to others. We're either marionettes here on earth, or we truly are free beings. And that ends on 182.
Wow. I'm almost tempted to ask if you're a voiceover artist.
No. Well, actually, for your listeners, I did record the book, audiobook. It was it was very, very difficult, but if they want an audiobook, I read it. So they'll be able to get my voice and my inflection throughout the book. It's 16 hours long. It's on audio,
wow.
Spotify. It's on all the audiobook platforms.
Oh, you recorded it yourself?
Yes.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. This has been a wonderful conversation with you. And I hope that when I invite you next time, you'd be willing to come again.
Oh, I'd be glad to. It'd be my honor. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you. Thank you so much. And please keep writing.
Okay.
And looking forward to reading all of your books, your eye-opening books.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. God bless.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I did. And until I come your way again next time, I'm saying stay safe, stay blessed, and bye-bye, everyone.